Hi everyone, this is Dan. I am a professor of social media at Oregon State University. I use these videos for my students, both online and otherwise, and this is the latest version of the video for defining social media. First is provocation. My favorites. Is cereal a soup? Now, this gets a surprising reaction out of people. Like, what a ridiculous question to ask. Is cereal a soup? All right, what is the heart of this question? We have the category soup. How do we know what fits into soup? Well, does a soup have to be hot? Or is a soup cold? Can a soup be sweet, or does the soup have to be savory? All questions of interpretation. All questions without necessarily a right or wrong answer. Corollary questions include, is a taco a sandwich? Is a hot dog a sandwich? Is a bicycle a skateboard? Is the little engineer? So is it? Is cereal soup? Think through your answer now. Maybe even write it down. Or say it to your friend. Or your cat, or whatever you're doing right now. Is cereal a soup? For those of you not familiar with cereal, that's usually milk or some other liquid type device that has a grain that has been puffed or cooked in some way deposited into it, possibly with a sweetener. Here's an attempt to solve this problem. Let's try a dictionary. The Oxford English Dictionary roughly defines soup as a boiled liquid food. Now you notice, this excludes all non-boiled soups. So any of you gazpacho fans out there are out of luck. A liquid boiled food. Their definition of a sandwich is even, well, actually less specific, as it involves two pieces of bread with something between them. Sometimes one piece of bread, sometimes not bread at all. So their definition of sandwich is very loose, but their definition of soup is very specific. Now, this is a fairly low stakes political act in this context, because soup is not a regional term of art. It doesn't it doesn't form the foundation of an agriculture industry for a country. It's just soup. But that definition of soup clearly excludes cereal. And I'm sure there are about a third of you out there who really say, yeah, cereal is a soup. So why are we starting here? We want to get a thought, and we really want to think hard for a minute or two, or 5, or 7, about what makes a good and a bad definition, and how that can help us think through how we define something as important for our course as social media. So, I'm an old policy debate person, debater and coach, and we have an argument called topicality that depends all on debating about which definitions are good and bad for debate. People need to think about this in their everyday lives. Definitional debates are important and they're interesting. So here are a few ideas that will help you start to think through definitions. So first and foremost, is the thing you're reading, is the definition truly intending to define? One major problem, and I used to teach this exercise, and you will actually have this exercise in the online version of the course, is I actually have you read definitions of social media that literally are marketing ploys by people who define social media as their company, right? You can also see definitions in the context of academic articles or business proposals or the stock market that actually aren't intentions to define. They're just ways of trying to generate some common meaning. So the best definitions are those where people really sit down and they try to figure out how to write a definition. And a definition that typically would have a description of the thing using other nouns that tend to refer to the key qualities of that thing. Context. There are specialist dictionaries, the most important of which is the Oxford English Dictionary, which is a historical dictionary that does a very good job tracing the evolution, the sort of diachronic history of terms. Black's Law Dictionary is very useful for understanding the legal use of terms. There may be other dictionaries that you use for your specific thing in your part of your life that you should pay very close attention to. Webster's, American Heritage, those are fine, but again, they're not specialist dictionaries. Next, you need a bright line. It's great to have a definition where you really know what is in and what is out. And beyond that, you need to have meaningful inclusion and exclusion in your definition. Your definition can't have just a list of things like social media is Facebook, MySpace, and Twitter. Well, those are things that would be included, but I get nothing from this. I see no bright line that would tell me that Snapchat isn't social media or that Yik Yak isn't social media. And finally, you have to consider the relationship to common use. Your definition, if it is too far, if it doesn't help us understand our terms in everyday life, it's not going to work. So defining social media as all media is just not going to work because people have an intuitive definition of social media, which probably means something like Facebook or Instagram. And it doesn't mean, the bill pay app for the power company. Good definitions are intentionally trying to define the thing. They are created in a relevant context with people who are thinking about the thing in a detailed, rigorous way. They have some sort of bright line that allows us to say what the thing actually is. You can determine meaningful inclusions and exclusions from them, and they make some sense to people. So what's at stake in this? Think about applying for jobs, applying for internships, trying to be a media practitioner in this time period. If you take, say, the sequence of courses at Oregon State, and you get your Google Analytics certificates, and you do all this other stuff, and read all of the contemporary research and social network studies, and do internships and whatever else, you want to walk out of here, as a person with skills as a Snap creative and whatever else, and say, yeah, I am a social media specialist. You don't want then people who have none of that specialized education to say, yeah, I know about social media. I wrote a blog. You get that this is deeply political, right? That there is something about your life and the stakes in your life that are going to drive you to make this definition. And you're saying, but damn, that means that it's not like neutral or objective. Sorry, friend. Most definitions are not neutral or objective. Now, there are better and worse and more and less self-serving. In this case, I'm merely saying what's at stake. That we need social media to mean something. We need it to not be meaningless. Now, the most commonly cited definition is from a classic 2007 article by Dana Boyd and Nicole Ellison, and they updated this in 2013. We'll get into their definitions next. Now, they had two definitions. The 2007 definition says web-based services that allow individuals to 1. Construct a public or semi-public profile within a bounded system, 2. Articulate a list of other users with whom they share a connection, and 3. View and traverse their list of connections and those made by others within the system. This is an awesome definition if you are defining social media as MySpace, right? That's what it is, and it's good. And honestly, this is probably the most useful definition of social media until their second one. So what this does is it says it has to be web-based. It has to have a profile inside of a system, so it can't be just a regular website. That's why it's within a bounded system. You have to articulate a list of things to other users with whom you share a connection, so it can't just be making an entry in IMDb. And you have to be able to look and view things within the system. So the basic user browsing behavior of MySpace. Now, look at the 2013 definition, and you really see a shift from a profile-centric to a stream-centric definition, and really this is a definition of Facebook you're seeing. A social network site is a networked communication platform in which participants, 1, have uniquely identifiable profiles that consist of user-supplied content, content created by other users, and or system-provided data. Notice here they're saying uniquely identifiable. This gets around the sort of debate about real names, which of course continues to this day. 2, can publicly articulate connections that can be viewed or traversed by others. Now notice connections. That doesn't necessarily mean friends lists or whatever else, but that you have to make some kind of public act of linking to something. And finally, 3, can consume, produce, and or interact with streams of content provided by their connections on the site. Now this is a pretty good definition. However, it can have a few challenges. First, we look at the criterion 1. That was the criterion for how do we deal with uniquely identifiable profiles. There are semantic issues with the construction and or. If you take the and ors as ors in both criteria 1 and 3, Netflix and Hulu and Uber become social media. And students roundly reject this. When we go through it and we say, oh, a social media site is a system with user-created data that allows you to see system-generated content. So system content creation, system content viewing, that is not social media. Now, this is largely a creature of the grammatical problem of and or. Clearly what Boyd and Ellison are trying to do is to say that it's not just the profile and it's not just user stuff, because social media sites are a socio-technical assemblage. Meaning that there's a bunch of robot stuff, but not just robots. A bunch of people stuff, but not just people. Now, if you eliminate that, if you take out that and or take out the entire third part of criteria one, you get rid of Reddit. You get rid of anything purely locative, and I'm not sure that that helps us with social media. So we end up in this ambiguous spot where it's just really hard to write that sentence to get the things we want in and the things we want out. Criterion 2. Now, the very original version of this, of course, was about MySpace, which was all about who sees whose friend network. As of January 2015, this is a real tear for me because I used to love assigning this in my cultural analytics class. You can't even extract your personal network. You know, you can't pull out your friends of friends, get the modularity, and then show the network of who you know who knows who. At the same time, if you remove the connectivity criterion, if you take this out, Netflix becomes social media, right? The reason why this criteria will be in there is the users have to be having some kind of activity that is publicly visible. Now, I have some students who believe that any level of meta-representation of user intent should count as network articulation. So they believe that the up and down thumb on any kind of like or dislike or any counting mechanism should count as a public articulation. Now, a lot of the other students strongly disagree, right? Because they don't want simple up vote, down vote to become it's necessary to be social media. And then finally, 3, you again have the and or challenge here, but really it boils down to that there must be a synchronic interface. Specifically that you have to be able to see and interact with the stuff on the site. And I think this is by far the least controversial of these points. We have yet in my classes ever, and I've had several thousand people through class, we have never come up with an interfaceless social network. I actually don't think it's possible, which is kind of a big claim. But I really think that this one is just locked in. So let's abstract both together. Let's look for those commonalities. First and foremost, you have to be able to create some kind of profile. Now, that profile in both cases involves stuff that you make and stuff that you probably don't make. So it's got to have a profile. And then, of course, the debate about what a profile is something that's going to be important too. But first and foremost, it's got to have some kind of profile. Now, the harder you define profile, the more likely you are to lose Reddit, right? The more likely you are to lose Snapchat. And these are the boundary cases that have caused problems in class. They're going to cause problems on your exams and your papers and whatever else. If you define profile, if you make that profile boundary too high, you're going to get rid of things that people obviously think are social media. At the same time, if you define it too low, you're going to get to silly season where cable TV becomes social media, right? So some kind of profile. Second, that you network that profile with other users. Now, what that networking means is up in the air. Like us, if you don't use the stories feature of Snapchat, it's probably not actually social media. Because if we start from the perspective that telephony and instant messaging are not social media, then a service that replicates or extends telephony or instant messaging, SMS, is not social media. You start to see where this becomes an important question. You know, how much like the phone can social media be? And finally, you have to be able to serve streams of content produced by those users or have that provided to you in some kind of stream. So what you need to include, you want systems that automatically produce content for or about users that facilitate ambient awareness. Does that make sense? You want ambient awareness of your social network. Things you want to exclude. Systems that are stocked with content produced by the legacy media and pure transaction facilitation systems. So what we're really trying to do here is get this really careful tuning act done of what we think is necessary and sufficient for a profile and for ambient and visibility for ambient awareness. And if we determine that a profile, and depending on where you set profile and awareness, you end up with very different definitions of social media. So there's the tension. Boyd and Ellison see that the original definition they had was about the profiles and not the streams. It was about the nouns, not the verbs, to use their language. And thus they had to update it. I mean, the article is excellent. They're also entirely on point that social network integration enhances almost all media. And social network enhancement, like things, are basically everywhere. You know, is accessing the Facebook API at some point enough to make anything social media, even say a chainsaw rental? Finally, it's really hard to pick a definition. But generally, when you come up with your professional definition, the one that you're going to use in life when you're selling your services to a client or whatever else, you want to have it be some kind of a system with a profile, a network, and surfing through that network. And people will understand what you're talking about. At the end of the day, social media as we understand it has to be about people accessing some awareness of each other vis-a-vis a web-based platform that tends to have those three elements. Of course, this will change, and I'm sure I will re-record this video within 18 months.